the 11 o'clock tour. This is all about escapes that occurred inside the jail. My name's Chris, I'll be your tour guide. I do the research here at Dubbo Gaol, so all the information that you've been reading around the site, stuff on if you've been using the digital maps, that's all come from the research that we've done here. If you have any questions as the tour goes on, they don't have to be about escapes. If something's piqued your interest along the way, now's the time to ask your questions. You've got the right guy. Feel free to lob them at me. If you've got one that you think might be a bit of a long-winded answer, you're about to discover I love long-winded answers. But I'm happy to stick around at the end and have a chat for as long as you want to, if you're after info. Well, the very first place that we're going to start telling escape stories is the remand yards, which is a good place to start anyway, because you've come through the Quarry Street entrance, you've probably gone into the male cell division. You haven't really naturally kind of followed the path that a prisoner would have though. The very first experience a person would have had with prison life oftentimes was through the remand yards as a remandee. After you've been arrested by the police but you hadn't gone to trial, a number of people who didn't have much money, couldn't raise bail, were held in custody while they waited for their trial to take place. So actually, this would have been sort of the first little snapshot of prison life that a person would have had. So let's duck in there before we actually get into the meat and bones of the tour. And this is the one, nicknamed the bird cage, which if you haven't been inside yet, you'll soon discover why it's nicknamed that for pretty obvious reasons. So feel free to grab a seat. Sit down. Don't recommend using the toilets. They don't work. So this is would have been your first introduction to prison life. There are 2 yards. One yard was for people who had been convicted before, who had been to jail before, and the other yard was for people who hadn't been to jail. And that was the basic separation. I know we've got some pictures here of some men and women, but only men would have been held in these remand yards. The female prisoners would have just been held in the female division in the cells. There wasn't a special yard for them. There were never as many women as there were men, so they didn't think that they needed a whole special trial yard for them. So this can probably be seen as like a glorified waiting room. I'm sure you've all possibly experienced a little something of what these people would have experienced if you've ever waited in a doctor's office. You'd be waiting there for a while, you probably feel like you're in jail, and that's essentially what people were doing in here. They were waiting. It's probably the reason why there's so much graffiti inside this space, more so than in any other part of the jail. And a lot of it is tally marks of people marking down the days. Might be, writing names, of course, or drawing little pictures on the walls, like little goannas and emus. And sometimes you can get a little insight into what a person did to get arrested and what they were waiting for. Like over here, we have M. Rake on the 1st of July 1954, 5 burglaries, pistol illegal. He was from Bondi. He, his brother, and a younger friend of theirs, they're all in their early 20s or late teens, stole a car in Bondi, drove it into the Central West, and they had a gun, and they decided to hold up a bunch of places in Wellington and Dubbo. One of them, Rake, eventually got caught. The other 2 got in the car and tried to travel back to Bondi, but totaled the car and ended up getting caught on the road. But yeah, it's an interesting space to explore. The buildings do tell stories. That's one story. People were here, they left their mark while they were waiting for their trial. The other story is in the makeup of the building itself, what materials have gone into making this, because that tells a story too. This section, this line onwards, this is the older section of the yards. They were built in 1929 as part of the jail being literally flipped over. Not many people like there being a jail on the main street. How they tried to solve it without closing the place down was to close the front entrance, just rip it up completely, to open up a new entrance, the eastern entrance, so that people could be brought in and out of jail with the courthouse right behind the jail, behind the scenes, without sometimes people literally being dragged, kicking and screaming on the streets. Okay, so you can tell that it's older from the cement mix, the bricks that have seen better days, and knowing that, you can kind of now work out that used to be the original wall, went straight down here. If you look even closer, there's a small cement patch here where the toilet used to be. Now, this section was added on after an escape in 1936, purely because of, or at least the design that the way that they decided to design this extension was completely and utterly affected by the escape of Thomas Munday in 1936. So in 1936, Thomas Munday, when he walked into this yard, what he was looking at was the wall going straight down, no border of corrugated iron along the outside there. It was just completely open to the elements. Toilet just there, and a cistern above the toilet. Unlike that toilet there, we'll talk about why it's a bit different shortly, but there was a cistern for flushing the toilet, pull the chain, flush the toilet right there. Now, he'd just been brought in after being recaptured. He's already escaped once, so this is in his brain, he's that type of person. He was being held at Dunedoo for stealing cars. When he told the Dunedoo lockup keeper that his Dunny can, his toilet bucket, was full and needed to be emptied. The Dunedoo lockup keeper opened up his cell door, turned his back. He's got a hold of this big heavy night tub toilet bucket, swung it and smacked him on the back of the head, knocking out the Dunedoo lockup keeper cold. So he's out. There weren't any walls to stop him, it's just a lockup. So he's gone on the run, broken into a store at Dunedoo to get a change of clothes so he doesn't look like a prisoner anymore. Unfortunately for him, 24 hours later though, he was caught jumping on a train, jumping the rattler, trying to get on a train to get a ticket. When you escape, the police are going to watch the roads, they're going to watch the train station, they're pretty obvious places, and he was caught at one of the most obvious, trying to get out of town. He was sent to Dubbo to face trial for escape from custody and break, enter and steal. You can almost see the little cogs starting to whir as he's being brought in here. I mean, the guards, they've got a different perspective on life. The prisoners on the inside have got a lot of time on their hands to look at things a bit differently. So the guards haven't noticed the obvious problem with the design of this yard. So he's walked in, and I can just imagine he's seen this cistern and boom, little cogs started whirring. He's been left alone. At some point, he's determined that he's not being watched or the guard's not around. He goes straight to this cistern and takes out of the cistern the metal arm for flushing the toilet that's attached to the chain. Takes that out, climbs up on top of the cistern and is able to reach up to the caged roof, which doesn't have that border around it. Uses that metal arm to break apart parts of the cage to make a gap for himself and pulls himself up through that gap. Now he's on top of the roof. He hasn't escaped yet, but he's escaped from the yard. Obviously he'd be up there keeping a bit of an eye out for the guard. No one's around. He jumps down into the jail and rips off a paling from the exercise yard picket fence. So rips off one of those wooden palings. We know exactly where he escaped over the walls because he carried that paling to the corner where the perimeter wall just outside and the female division building meet. Just at that corner is a downpipe which is recessed into the wall. Very smart, you don't want downpipes outside of the wall. Remember that because in 1934 those downpipes were changed, but we'll get back to that, we'll park that. What he sees is the downpipe recessed into the wall. He takes his paling, sticks his paling in the corner of the two brick walls, climbs up it and grabs a hold of the elbow of the downpipe sticking out of the wall and connecting to the gutter. Grabs a hold of that, pulls himself up, grabs a hold of the top of the perimeter wall, and that's how he gets up and over and escapes. Now, at some point, the guard does come along. Unlike the convicted prisoners who are doing labour, they're being watched quite a lot, quite intensively. The remandees, only every so often would a guard come along and just, open the window, check on everything. So at some point someone's done that, nobody in the yard, but there's a dirty great big hole in the roof. There's been an escape, and at some point they do realise that he's got down. So the chase is on. It looks like he's learned his lesson a little bit. He doesn't go by the roads, he doesn't go by the train, he goes by bush, but he heads to Narromine. And unfortunately for him, he's been second-guessed. The police have outthought him. When he's escaped, the police release a statement to say there's an escapee, and in that statement they say we think he's heading to Narromine, essentially, and that's exactly where he went. So when he got to Narromine, the police were on the lookout for him. He was recognised, and he was recaptured 48 hours after his escape. So he managed to double his time. If he kept escaping, exponentially, he would have been out for a long time. But this is, fortunately for him, the last escape that he managed. He was caught, he was brought back to Dubbo, and he faced trial at Dubbo, found guilty of all of his, 2 offences of escaping, break, enter and steal. He already had the stealing cars charge. So he ended up getting 5 years total for all of his various crimes. Because of that, things had to change. And that's after every escape, there's an inquiry. You've got to find out how it happened. Was it the design of the jail, or was it another prisoner who helped? Or was it a guard who was, lax in their duty, or maybe the guard helped? They have to figure out what happened, and they figured it out in here that it was the design of the yard. So, knocked out the wall, added this new section with a cement roof, which, has done future remandees a favour because they're pretty exposed to the elements here. Now they've got a little bit of shelter if it rains. Added this border of corrugated iron. New toilet. They didn't even want to tempt fate by having, even though it's under this roof, they didn't even want to tempt fate by having a cistern on the inside. They've put it on the back of the wall, both of them, with a hole to run the chain through. So you were flushing essentially from the outside in. Now, so that's the whole design of this is because of Thomas Munday. Perfect. They've prevented any more escapes from occurring in the remand yards. Really thought it out to try and, think 2 or 3 moves ahead of the prisoners. Unfortunately, if you're going to make a change like this, you better make sure that you have covered every angle, because if there's just the slightest vulnerability, a prisoner is going to exploit it. They do have, again, a lot of time on their hands to think creatively. So what's happened is these changes have prevented escapes inside the remand yards. However, by adding this new extension on, it's actually caused another escape to occur on the other side of the yards. Completely, not what they had hoped to do, but when we go out there, that's our next spot, and see it, you'll think, how did they miss it? It's like the cistern, how would you miss that? But, it's easy to do, it's easy to find a leak after it rains. Any questions before we keep going on? No. We'll pop around the other side and see how this next escape occurred. So as we go along the tour, I hope you do start to kind of look around the site and look at the different fabrics and see how, different time periods. You can see different bits added on. Obviously, on the outside here, we can see that line where the extension is added on. Each part might not have to do with escapes, but they do tell part of the story of the jail, and there is a reason behind why things were built or why things were demolished. So, we've got our cisterns now, which they make a lot more sense. Before this tour, this is just a bit of plumbing tacked on the back of the wall, but now we know that there are the cisterns for inside the remand yards. There's the 2 holes for running the chain through, all to prevent further escapes occurring. And it's not like when they did all this, they wanted another escape to occur. They really were trying to think, how would a prisoner get out? So when they've added these, they've gone, well, what happens if someone climbs up on these cisterns, or more obviously what happens if someone climbs up the foul air outlet. That's why the wooden board was put there, purely to prevent, with lead sheeting kind of nailed into it. It's purely to prevent escapes. That's its only purpose. So it's not like they're not thinking of escapes. However, would have been a big job to do when you think about it. A jail is a very sensitive place. So effectively you're taking remandees who weren't allowed to mix with other prisoners. That's why you had a separate yard. They weren't allowed to mix with convicted prisoners. You take away the space where they're supposed to be, so you've got to shuffle things around in your jail to accommodate for them. You're bringing contractors in to do brickwork and plumbing work. You're trying to make sure that no one's is passing contraband or prisoners aren't escaping as they're walking in, etc., etc. Big job. So they're very much focused on what's going on this way, and not so much focused on what's already in this space to begin with, that the guards and the prisoners have been walking past each day, and the contractors to do this work, this shelter shed roof. And this is another example of, when you look closely enough, the building telling us a story. Because we can see the change that was made, There's a little section there, a little section at the top of these 3 posts. This is new. We had some wood rot, so we've had to replace that section. But top of these 3 posts show a change that was made. Sections have been cut out of the posts to drop the roof down, and then they've just reattached them with some metal tabs there. So that says that originally this roof used to be a bit taller than it is now. That was until a prisoner by the name of John Vester Green escaped in 1945. So Vester Green was had an 8-month sentence. We don't know what he'd done, but we do know some of his previous crimes. We know that he'd been in and out of the jail for vagrancy. The Vagrancy Act was pretty broad, so that covered a whole lot of minor offences like, being homeless essentially was a crime, having no money on you. If you can prove you had money, visible means of support if you get arrested. Begging for alms, public drunkenness, swearing in public, they were all offences that could get you sent to jail. He was a champion amateur boxer, and he'd sometimes get arrested for getting into fights or into unsanctioned matches along the Macquarie River. He had a bit of a history of being in jail. So we don't know what he exactly got 8 months for, but we do know that when he attempted to escape, he had 2 weeks left on his 8-month sentence. So he was practically released, but it looks like he wanted to fast track that release. And maybe it's the same thing that happened with Thomas Munday. As soon as he walked in, he saw it like a neon light flashing at him, "Escape from me here." That's what possibly as he was walking, for the past 7.5 months back and forth, he's been seeing this roof and the sign going, "Escape from me." And the temptation got too much because he was inside his cell, in the male cell division, probably finishing up his breakfast, because at that time the guard was opening up his door, and it mentions his breakfast, so likely the utensils were about to get collected by the tub men. They were light labour prisoners who washed all the spoons and bowls and things. It didn't get to that point. As soon as the guard has opened up the door, he sees this hunk of a boxer charging at him and knocking him back against the wall. So you can imagine that kind of lump of an individual shoulder charging you with all their force while you're unprepared for it. Knocks him back, and Vester Green, barefoot, sprints down the hall of the male cell division here, leaps over the picket fence into this yard, climbs up on top of the roof, which is a bit taller than it is now, leaps up and grabs a hold of the lip of the remand yard roof and pulls himself up on top of that, and then takes a running leap and jumps over that gap to the female division roof. And we know exactly where he landed because the dents that he made as he hit the roof are still there. So I've painted a green sheet, but the sun's doing a good job in highlighting them. Those dents there is when his feet hit the roof. And from there, that building's adjacent to the perimeter wall. He just had to run to the end, jump off, and to quote the newspaper article, one of the newspaper articles, he disappeared into the bush as he sprinted off. Now, he escaped in January of 1945. He was recaptured because in February of 1945, he next appears in the paper fronting up in front of the judge for escaping from custody. So he was caught. We don't know how long specifically he was out for, or what were the circumstances of his recapture. But he was a Dubbo local, and he was probably recognised by someone around town, and he's been sent back. He ends up getting 6 months on top of his 8-month sentence for escaping from custody. So he's turned his 2 weeks left into another 6 months inside jail. After the escape, another inquiry is done, and the obvious problem has been identified. And to resolve that, they've just literally dropped the roof down here to prevent the same thing happening again. So it's another instance of the building telling us a little bit of a story. Another one, which I can see from here, is the downpipe. So there's a downpipe just there. There's another one down that little alley. That one down the alley is, the elbow of that is the one that Munday used to pull himself up. There's another one inside the female division, all 3 of which very smartly recessed into the wall. However, before Thomas Munday's escape, in 1934, those 3 downpipes were outside of the wall, which in retrospect, not a great place to have downpipes, particularly the one inside the female division where the escape occurred, which we'll be seeing next, which is right next to the perimeter walls. Not a great idea, which the prison authorities it was made obvious to them when the only female prisoner to escape from Dubbo Gaol piped up them. You will see though, if you look around, say down the male cell division at the hospital or the amenities and hospital block here, that there are downpipes outside of the wall. They don't support body weight though, so if you try to climb up it, it's going to pull the whole thing down with you. Or you'll get to the top of the roof and then you can't go anywhere because they're not really near any of the walls, so it's a bit of a gap. But this one that we're about to see very much could support body weight, and it's just another instance of a small oversight. When the female division was being constructed and completed in the 1890s, there was a hell of a lot of work being done for the jail to upgrade it, and the downpipes were only a small, tiny, teeny piece of that big puzzle. So they just were just messy. It took until 1934 for someone to deploy them. So we'll put in here.
This is like a guard house or something. Woman.
Just take note of the downpipe there. That's where the escape occurred. But feel free to take a seat now that you know that that's where it is. If you want to grab a seat and sit down, go for it. Just ask that you airbrush, delete out of or ignore out of your mind the set of stairs leading up to the watchtower. So, it's a pretty stupid place to have a set of stairs, but they're not original to the jail. They're to allow you access to the tower. I'll stand out of the sun. But to get into the tower for the guards at the time the jail was operational, you would have first had to have been outside of the jail anyway. The door to the tower was on the outside, which led into the internal staircase, which went up into a trapdoor. So just ignore that. But you might as well have had a set of stairs with that downpipe over there, jutting out of the wall. 1934, a 17-year-old, we don't know her name, but we do know that she'd been arrested for vagrancy. Not too sure specifically what for. As I said, the Vagrancy Act covers a whole bunch of stuff. Typically targeted pretty vulnerable people, like homeless people. So we're not too sure why she was in Dubbo Gaol specifically, but she was waiting for her trial for vagrancy. At some point, the matron, who was generally the jailer's wife, had let her out of her cell to do some exercise. The remandees, you couldn't leave them cooped up inside a cell. The male prisoners got to stay in the backyard, the birdcage during the day. They slept in a cell at night. For the female prisoners, they'd be allowed out to just wander the grass for a little bit to get air and sunshine. But then she was left alone. So the matron had brought her out and then left her, locked the door, let her just wander about. And she literally was alone. After 1904, there were no other female guards employed at Dubbo Gaol, just because really there was an average of one prisoner inside the female division a day. As compared to the male cell division, where you could get an average of 30, 40. The highest recorded number at one time was 61. The highest recorded number in the female division was 8. So they didn't need to pay for all these guards when the matron could have done it herself. So she was the only guard that was allowed inside the female division. There was no one up on the watchtower because the jail was trying to cut costs. So they did that by, at certain times during the day, just not having a tower guard, which is one way to cut costs, but there are repercussions sometimes when you don't have people watching the prisoners. So she's completely alone, and she grabs the bull by the horns. She's really, probably again, like these other prisoners, have seen that vulnerability. She's noticed that downpipe and thought, what if? Now's her opportunity. She runs straight to the downpipe, climbs up the downpipe and gets to the top of the wall, and she jumps over. She escapes like a bolt of lightning. She hits the deck. Unfortunately for her, that's really as far as she got, because as soon as she hit the ground, she fell very badly and broke her ankle on the way down. She was only able to hobble about 50 yards, probably running on pure adrenaline, before she was recaptured, basically unconscious behind a bush. She was brought into Dubbo Gaol and forwarded to Dubbo Hospital because they suspected she had some internal injuries, so she was called. We don't know what sentence she ended up getting in the end, probably an extra 6 months on top of whatever vagrancy offence she may have been found guilty of. But there was no follow-up article except to say that her original trial date was postponed because she was in the hospital, so I don't know what happened to her, but we know physically what happened to the jail after her escape. They have recessed those downpipes to try and prevent anyone else doing that. So a lot of escapes are kind of moments of opportunity. One of them, probably the easiest escape that we have on record, was John Williams, whose real name was Patrick Reynolds. His picture's inside the kitchen, so you can check out what the myriad of crimes he committed throughout his history. But he was in Dubbo Gaol for robbery at this particular stage. They allowed him up on top of the watchtower to clean it, which in retrospect, probably not the best place to have a prisoner up on top of the walls, because he wasn't alone. There was a guard up there with him, Tower Guard Green, who was doing his job. He was watching inside the jail with his carbine. Obviously, Williams has seen this opportunity. He's just gone, hang on a second, well, I'll just jump off. And that's what he did. As I said, the easiest escape from Dubbo Gaol, he just jumped off the wall and ran. Now, if you escape, it's not like you're doing it on a whim. I mean, some prisoners probably did do it on a whim, but it's not like it was a joke or anything, because you're taking your life into your own hands. These prisoners could have gotten shot when they escaped, and that's exactly what could have happened with Williams, because the guards, seeing him escaping, shouted the warning, freeze or I'll shoot. He didn't freeze, so he shot 2 shots, and he wasn't aiming to miss. Fired 2 shots at Williams as he sprinted through the courthouse grounds. They did miss, however, and he couldn't get a 3rd shot because we're in the centre of town. Yeah. He's running towards Brisbane Street, fairly busy area, and he actually ran in front of, ran behind Mrs. Ricketts, the courthouse keeper's wife. So he really couldn't get another clean shot. Shouting, escape, gunshots have gone off. Obviously, guards are starting to go, what's going on, and run out of the jail. But the courthouse keeper, John Ricketts, has heard these gunshots first. He's the first on the scene, sees the prisoner sprinting off and chases after him. He's the first one to catch him. He crash tackles him to the ground in the yard of the coach builder's shop, and sits on top of him until the guards come to collect him. So he gets caught as well. Now, we're a jail. There's lots of escapes. There's been 28 escapes in the history of Dubbo Gaol. Out of that history, though, there's only been one person who's attempted to break into the jail.
That's interesting.
It's very sweet, actually, why he did it. It's
interesting.
Lovely, very stupid, but very lovely. So if prisoners weren't escaping, they were probably dreaming of escape. Not many of them were working out the best ways to get back into the place. There were easier ways to get into a jail than what this guy did. So Keith Dubbo in 1954 had just been released from Dubbo Gaol after serving 6 months for vagrancy. He had a track record of vagrancy. He was a homeless guy and often get picked up for that, and for this particular instance he got 6 months. They let him go. The very night that he was released, he was caught breaking back into the jail on top of this roof when the jailer, whose house was behind the jail at this point, heard his dog barking. Came out to investigate. The jail's had a lot of problems with people chucking, contraband over the wall, so he was coming out to see maybe if a prisoner was escaping, but more likely he was coming out to see if anyone was loitering around the grounds, trying to lob something over the wall. Doesn't see anything, so he decides to walk inside to have a chat to, g'day guys, how you going? Walk inside to have a chat to the night warder, the only guard on duty at night time, just checking up on him. As they're chatting, they both hear a noise up on top of this roof. There's somebody up there, but they don't want to go, oh, is anyone up there? Because the guy's going to just leg it. So I like this. The jailer gets smart. I like to think that he may have, done the big, it's getting like, whoa, is that the time? I've got to go back home and hit the hay, because he's gone outside of the jail, and for all intents and purposes, he looks like he's going back home. Instead of going inside, though, he hides behind his lemon tree in his backyard and goes on stakeout. Look, peering through the branches, he's looking back at the top of the roof here, and his suspicions are played true. After a time, Keith's head pops up. There is someone there, and he spots him, trying to break into the jail. He calls the police, the alarm is raised, and because there are water cottages and police cottages all around the jail, people are here on the scene pretty quick, and he's ordered to make his way back down a homemade ladder that they discover around the corner of the jail. So as he's coming down, he drops a bottle. Keith drops this bottle, which smashes on the ground, which is the key to all of this. He gets to the bottom of the ladder, and even though he's surrounded by police, he has a crack at trying to run away. Gets 10 metres before he's caught. He's handcuffed, and he's walked to the police station. It's en route to the police station that he's asked the obvious question, which is, what are you doing? Why are you breaking back into jail? We just released you. And his response is what made the headline at the time. It's how we know this story so well. His response was, and I quote, "I was trying to bring a drink for my mate, Bob O'Grady." Robert O'Grady was another prisoner inside the jail, serving 8 months in the jail. They'd obviously become firm friends. He was trying to Uber Eats his mate a bowl of grog into the jail, trying to hand deliver him some wine. That's what smashed on the ground. Trying to get his mate some grog, got caught for that. Got 4 months for breaking into jail, which is obviously a crime, and another 4 months on top of that for trying to smuggle in a prohibited article, the bottle plonk. So he got 8 months, longer than his original sentence, for trying to smuggle in some wine for his mate who had a couple of months left on his sentence. Yeah, anyway, I don't know if they were ever reunited or anything like that, but he certainly went back to jail after that little,
That's crazy.
little fool's errand that he's trying to do. He's probably half cut himself as well when he came up with the ploy. Anyway, that's the only guy breaking in. We'll finish off with, so there's lots of escapes that were kind of in the moment. There was a bit of planning because obviously someone's seen something that's, a vulnerability and whatnot. But some literally were someone being up on the wall just going, oh, just jump off, and that was the escape attempt. But the last one that we'll finish up with at the front of the mail cell division did have a bit of planning behind it. It involved someone on the outside smuggling something into jail, which they could use to try and escape. And it's the most absurd story that we have.
This is the family version, huh? I didn't see that.
We'll finish up
Who
with
is
that,
that?
and then,
Huh?
Who's in it?
And her too.
That's the warden's wife.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Female person. Division. So those are the graves in that area, guys. Yeah. After execution, they buried in this area. There's 4 people there buried. Okay.
front part of the house in 1871 as the third jail in Dubbo. So there were 2 other versions of the jail that don't exist anymore, but when this one was built, everything was built around it. As a little bit of trivia, I think it says this on your digital maps, I don't know about your hard copy map, but there is a window on the 2 dark cells. A shutter on the 2 dark cells which can be closed. The other windows were just open to the elements. The reason why there's a shutter there is because at the turn of the century they were deciding to get rid of dark cells. You know, they were considered torture. People weren't coming out better, they were actually coming out worse than what they wanted. So there was an edict that the dark cells should be abolished in New South Wales, and in around 1905 in Dubbo they got rid of the dark cells by essentially just turning them into light cells by adding windows and putting in lights inside the cell. However, a little bit of a tricky way of getting around not having a dark cell, they could still use it as a dark cell because they're the only 2 cells with shutters. It's officially a light cell because it has windows, but it didn't say anything about closing windows. So the reason why they have shutters on them is because that they can close them when someone's in there and effectively turn it back into a dark cell unofficially. So it's a bit of a roundabout way of getting around the not being able to use dark cells. Anyway, just a trigger. So this last story I'll tell you occurred in 1897, and the jail was a little bit different in 1897 as well. For one thing, it didn't have the eastern entrance. There was only one way in and one way out of the jail, and it was the entrance you came in. This wall was a little bit further forward. The jailer's residence used to be out the front there. There used to be a doorway over in the corner there for the jailer. And above the rainwater tank effectively was what this was. There used to be a tank up on the wall which prisoners pumped water to. And that tank gravity-fed water to the jailer's residence. So that was a little bit different than it is today. This wall was level with the front wooden gates. So it was very much further forward. The jail was a bit larger. In that space over the wall used to be the old trial yards where people waited for their trial.
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't like the bird cage, it was just a shelter shed roof, table, a couple of benches, some toilets, that was it. There was another watchtower over there as well, the southwestern watchtower, which gave a view of all 4 walls, so it made a bit more sense than there were 2. And it's in that old trial yard, that's where this escape occurred. It was by the name of Frederick Clifford in November 1896. They'd been arrested for robbery, been breaking into hotel rooms. When they caught him, he had stolen stuff on him. And when they searched his room, not only did they find other stolen stuff, but they found break-in equipment. So crowbars and jemmies and skeleton keys. Didn't look good for him. He was sent to the quarter sessions, so he had some time to wait for the trial date. And he was still here in January 1897 waiting for his trial, but he obviously got sick of waiting around. Now, maybe because remandees got extra visitation rights than the prisoners, they got, were allowed more people visiting them, friends and family and whatnot. They weren't guilty yet, they weren't officially convicted. So maybe during one of these visitations, that's when the plot was hatched, because someone on the outside, early in the morning, has chucked over the wall into that yard a rope and an iron hook, a grappling hook, into the jail. So he's taken that grappling hook, wrapped a piece of cloth around the hook so it didn't make any noise. There was only one guard on duty. He threw the grappling hook over the wall, and hand over hand, he climbed over the wall, and he escaped. Okay? Unfortunately for him, that's as far as his good luck went, because the jailer, his house was right outside the jail, was on his veranda, having his cup of tea at this exact moment, in his dressing gown and slippers, so he's in his jammies, having a chat to his son, when he looks over to the jail and witnesses the escape happening right in front of his eyes. He literally sees the guy jumping over and landing on all fours on the other side.
Yeah, sure.
He sends his son away to get the police, and he gives chase, much to the delight of the newspapers that are reporting on this, because they can insert the Benny Hill music now, and you can imagine the chase. In a 15-minute chase ensued.
Yeah.
The jailer in his pyjamas chasing this prisoner over fences, into people's backyards, down alleyways. Halfway through the chase, the jailer would have got him. He was just within his grasp, and the Dubbo Liberal reported that just as he was about to nab the prisoner about 7 minutes into the chase, his slippers came off. And he had to run back down the street to get his slippers before he could regain the chase again. So completely ridiculous. At some point, probably because of that little incident, the prisoner was able to outrun the guard and run down an alley. The Dubbo Liberal reported he jumped a fence and hid between a building and the fence. The Dubbo Dispatch added their own little comedic seasoning and said that he hid in an outhouse in a toilet. Either way, by this stage, lots of people were watching, and a lady sticking her head out of the window had seen him run down the alleyway and indicated to the jailer, he's gone down there. The jailer wheels down and either corners him in the toilet or corners him between the fence line, and the prisoner attempts to run again. I imagine by this stage, if I was the jailer, 15 minutes into a pursuit, I'd be stuffed, which may have inspired this next thing, which is my favourite bit. Just as maybe a moment of pure desperation, pure improvisation, he takes his hand and he puts his hand inside his dressing gown pocket and screams at the prisoner, and I quote, these were his exact words, "Freeze or I'll blow your brains out," end quote. Completely bluffing that he's got a gun, which he didn't. He was just having a cuppa recently in his jammies. He's screaming he's going to shoot the prisoner. In the heat of the moment, the prisoner's suddenly confronted with someone saying they're going to blow his brains out. So he stops in his tracks. He doesn't want to get shot, and before he can kind of maybe weigh up whether the jailer has a gun, that's when the jailer is able to crash tackle him to the ground, get him in a headlock, and that's where he's held. He's held in this headlock until police officers arrive on the scene. His arrest is there, bundled up, and then carried back to the jail and thrown in the cell. He's caught after all that. He ends up getting 5 years for his original sentence of robbery, and an extra 6 months on top of that for escaping from custody, which would have been like one of those black and white Keystone Cops chases.
Yeah.
I think utterly ridiculous.